The train cut a black ribbon through the snowbound prairie, groaning like an old man remembering things best left buried. Inside one of its worn wooden cars, a girl sat with her hands folded neatly in her lap, her gloves stiff with mended seams. She did not fidget. She did not look around. Her gaze was fixed on the glass, where frost feathered the corners like lace, and beyond it, the endless white of Wyoming stretched wide, unwelcoming and unfamiliar. Her name was Eliza, though no one in Dry Willow yet knew it. The name sat on her tongue like a secret, one she had grown cautious in offering. She was not more than 20, not in years, but her eyes held the stillness of someone older. Not dulled, not lifeless, but settled, as if they had seen too much to keep blinking in surprise. She had boarded the train in St. Louis with a carpetbag, a letter folded carefully in her coat, and the kind of resolve that doesn't rise from hope, but from the lack of any other choice. The letter had been brief. Seeking wife, domestic, God-fearing, of plain but tidy appearance. Good manners a must. Prefer no attachments. Applicant must be of sound health. Dry Willow, Wyoming. It had been signed in black ink. Nathaniel Carr. That had been no flourishes. No promises of love, or even warmth. But it had been enough. Enough to draw Eliza from the ashes of her family's house. From the graveyard rows that held her mother, her brother, her father, in cold Missouri earth. The fever had taken them one by one, and left her untouched, at least in body. The train moaned to a halt, sending a long hiss through the brittle morning air. Dry Willow's station was a modest platform surrounded by snowdrifts, a scattering of men with chapped faces, and a single painted sign nailed askew. She stepped down carefully, boots pressing into icy slush. The cold reached through her wool coat with the intimacy of an old enemy. She felt it greet her bones. She did not flinch. Her intended was easy to spot. Nathaniel Carr stood tall, well-dressed, a man of order and pressed collars. He was older than she expected, perhaps 40, with dark eyes that squinted when he looked her over. Not a word spoken yet, and already she felt the heat of judgment in his silence. He did not tip his hat. "You're the girl?" he asked flatly, though her presence had already confirmed it. "I am," she replied, voice calm and even. "Eliza Hart." There was a pause. A look passed over him, subtle but unmistakable. The kind men give a ripe fruit and find it underripe. She saw it, and tucked her chin slightly lower, not in submission, but to guard the flame in her chest from his wind. "You're younger than I imagined," he said, and the words landed, not like surprise, but like accusation. Eliza said nothing. He offered no arm, no smile, no gesture of welcome. Instead, he turned and began walking, assuming she would follow. Did the town blurred as they moved through it? The general store, a row of saloons, a pair of boys throwing pebbles at a frozen pump. The snow was falling again, slow and fat, like ash from a weary sky. They stopped in front of the boarding house, a red-bricked structure that leaned slightly to one side. Nathaniel turned. "You'll stay here tonight. Ill? Consider what's to be done," he said, as though deciding the fate of a half-spoiled ham. "Of course," Eliza said, steady. He left with no further words, no promise to return. Martha, the boarding house owner, took one look at her and gave a sigh that came from deep in her apron. "Room's warm, soup's hot. You look like you need both." That night, Eliza sat on the edge of her narrow bed, the room dimly lit by a kerosene lamp. She pulled the letter from her coat pocket and held it between her fingers, tracing the words until they blurred. Too young. That's what he had seen. Youth as a flaw, as proof she wasn't woman enough. He had looked at her and seen soft edges where he wanted steel, silence where he expected submission. What he didn't see, what no one saw, was how she had survived a winter of sickness and death alone, had buried her family without a word of complaint, had boarded a train with no certainty waiting at its end. He saw her age. He didn't see her in the morning. Martha brought up tea and a look that said more than she spoke. He sent word, she muttered. Says he's not going through with it. Eliza nodded once, slowly. The knot in her chest was not disappointment. It was weariness, a deep, old ache that said, "Of course. What'll you do now?" Martha asked. "I'll find work," she answered. "Not much for a girl like you around here, especially not without a husband." Eliza turned to the window. The snow was still falling. Outside, life went on, slow, muted, suspicious. "I'll manage," she said. She spent the next 2 days wandering the edge of town, offering to scrub floors, mend clothes, patch boots. Most said no. Some said yes, but not with honest eyes. By the 3rd day, she sat on the porch steps of the boarding house, her gloved fingers stitching the worn seam of her boot, when a shadow crossed her path. A man on horseback had stopped near the post. He dismounted slowly, movements that spoke of age and old injuries, and tied his horse with calm, deliberate hands. Then he looked at her, not through her. At her, he was rough around the edges, broad-shouldered, weathered, with eyes the color of driftwood, pale, but clear. His hat was pulled low, but not low enough to hide the faint scar that curved near his temple. A man who'd lived, and lost, and kept going. "You're the one Carr sent back," he said, voice low and even. She nodded. "So it seems." He looked at her a long moment. "You got a name, Eliza?" "I'm Thomas Avery," he said. "Run a ranch outside town. Lost my wife 2 winters ago. Got more land than hands to work it." She straightened, unsure what was being offered. "I'm not a skin for a wife," he added. "Just someone who doesn't mind chickens and wind." Eliza studied him. He wasn't smiling. He wasn't pitying her. He was just offering space. "I don't mind either," she said. He gave a short nod. "I'll come for you tomorrow." Then he tipped his hat, the first man in this town to do so, and walked back to his horse. As he rode away, Martha appeared behind her, arms crossed. "You trust him?" the older woman asked. "I don't know," Eliza answered. But he looked me in the eye, and for the first time in days, something inside her uncurled. Not hope, not yet, but maybe a beginning. Snowflakes caught in her lashes, and she let them. She did not blink them away. She sat there long after the horse had vanished into the white, watching, waiting, like someone who had learned how to outlast the cold. The wind along the ridge carried the scent of old pines and something sharper like iron and memory. Thomas Avery rode slowly, the reins loose in his calloused hands, letting the mare choose her pace as the hills gave way to his land. From up high, his ranch looked like a painting left out in the rain-gray barn. Sagging fence lines, a house that once knew laughter, now dulled by time and too much silence. 2 winters had passed since Lydia died, but the ache hadn't. It hadn't softened into nostalgia or warmed into gratitude. It just sat, quiet and stubborn, behind his ribs. He didn't weep. He didn't talk about her. Grief had become something he wore like his coat close, heavy, necessary. He came into town only when he had to. Salt, flour, nails, and wordless. Nods with men who respected his solitude. He never lingered. But that week, when his boots touched the porch of Martha's boarding house and he caught sight of the girl with winter in her eyes, something shifted. She wasn't doing anything remarkable, just sitting on the steps, threading a needle through a torn boot sole like she'd done it 100 times. Head bowed, shoulders square, still as stone, but not defeated. He didn't know why he stopped, only that her presence had a gravity to it, a quiet insistence that asked nothing yet pulled something loose in him. The next morning, she was waiting when he rode into town, already bundled and standing straight, her small bag at her feet. She climbed up behind him without a word, settling easily, as if she'd done this her whole life. They didn't speak on the ride. The wind did the talking, rustling through sage and grass, the occasional whinny of distant horses cutting through the hush. When they reached the ranch, he dismounted first and held the reins while she climbed down on her own. "This way," he said simply. The house was modest but sturdy, built by his grandfather, with thick beams and narrow windows. Inside, the hearth had gone cold, and the table bore dust like a second skin. She stepped in, eyes scanning not for wealth or comfort, but for where she might begin. "You'll sleep in the old study," he said, pointing. "Small, but warm. I'll pay what's fair. Chores mostly. Cooking chickens. You ever milked a cow?" "Yes." He waited, but she offered nothing more. Just yes, plain and firm. "Fine, I'll show you around." They moved through the barn, the lean-to, the root cellar. She listened closely, nodding sometimes, but mostly just watching, like she was storing every detail for later, like memory was armor. He noticed how she didn't waste a single glance. That evening, he found the fire already lit, a pot of stew simmering, the scent of thyme softening the air. She was setting the table not with grace or artifice, but with careful attention. A plate here, a spoon turned just so. When he sat, she did not serve him. She sat across from him and ate too. He liked that. She never asked about Lydia, not once. Yet she treated the house with a kind of reverence, wiping shelves that had gone untouched since his wife passed, dusting windowsills as though honoring something that still lingered. The days bled together. Chores at dawn, bread rising in the afternoons, a fox sniffing near the henhouse one night, driven off by her sharp whistle and quicker aim with a rock. She didn't flinch from the work, didn't complain when the wind howled through the cracks or when the pump froze. She simply adapted, bent without breaking. Jed, his ranch hand and longtime friend, watched her warily at first. "Too young to be out here alone," he said one morning, chewing on a toothpick. "She's not a child." Thomas replied, "She's not yours either." Thomas didn't answer, but he saw what Jed saw, that Eliza, for all her quiet strength, carried something fragile beneath the surface. Not weakness, not fear, just a kind of stillness, like a pond frozen deep beneath where sunlight couldn't reach. She spoke little, but when she did, her words came carefully chosen, like stones stacked in a stream not meant to stop the water, only shape how it flowed. One late afternoon, he found her in the pasture, kneeling beside a calf with a shallow breath and dull eyes. She'd wrapped it in old quilts and was murmuring softly. He didn't interrupt, only watched from a distance as she stayed there for hours, hand resting lightly on its flank until the breathing stopped. When she stood, she didn't cry. She just looked at the horizon like it owed her nothing, and she had made peace with that. That night, as they sat near the fire, a log snapped sharply, and the sound echoed in the room like a gunshot. Eliza didn't flinch. Thomas did. "I never learned how to sit still," he said suddenly, surprising himself. "Not until Lydia passed." Eliza stirred the coals with the poker, slow and thoughtful. "I never learned how to stop sitting still," she said. "Not until everyone I loved stopped being there to sit with." He nodded once, like something had been exchanged. A small truth for a small truth, enough to make silence feel less lonely. Word of her return to town began to spread. Nathaniel Carr, full of bruised pride and whispering tongues, let it be known that she was not what she seemed, that she was deceitful, that she had offered herself, and then left when he did not bend to her will. She said nothing of it, nor did Thomas ask. But one Sunday morning, when she rode into town with Jed to fetch sugar and salt, a woman outside the mercantile muttered loud enough for her to hear, "Little girls shouldn't play house with men. They end up with ruin." Eliza looked the woman in the eye. "I didn't come here to play," she said softly. "I came here to survive." And then she walked inside. That night, Thomas stood on the porch, nursing a mug of coffee, gone cold. The sky above stretched wide and black stars like scattered embers. He heard the door open, the soft creak of wood, and she stepped out beside him. He didn't look at her. "She can talk all she likes," he said. "I know. She doesn't know you. She doesn't want to." The wind rustled dry leaves. In the yard, a coyote cried far off. He turned then, met her gaze. "You thinking of leaving?" She didn't answer right away. Then, "Not yet." He took a breath. "Let it out slow." "I don't talk much," he said. "I don't mind quiet." He nodded. "Me neither." They stood side by side, not touching, not needing to. Just the sound of wind, and the smell of earth thawing beneath the last of winter's breath. In the dark, something shifted. Not loudly, not suddenly, just enough for the heart to feel it. And somewhere deep in the silence between them, a seed was planted. It would not bloom yet, but the soil at last was softening. The wind came first low and insistent, like a whisper that wouldn't let go. It curled through the cottonwoods and scraped across the plains, lifting dust and stray leaves, teasing at the eaves of the ranch house. By dusk, the air had changed. Even the horses knew. They stamped and huffed in their stalls, ears flicking, eyes uneasy. Eliza stood outside the barn, with her hand on the gate latch, head tilted slightly as though listening to something only she could hear. The sky above was the color of steel, heavy and pressed down close. Not rain, not yet, but something wilder, meaner. Thomas stepped out from the shadows of the corral. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You feel it too?" She nodded. "It's coming hard. Best get inside," he said. "This one's not just wind." Inside the house, shutters were fastened and lanterns lit. The windows trembled as the first gust hit like a shout. They ate in silence that night, the stew going cold between them as the walls creaked and the fire danced low. Something unspoken crackled in the air, like the storm outside had crept between them, stirring things that had long stayed buried. Thomas cleared his throat. "There's talk in town." Eliza didn't look up from her bowl. "About you. About Carr. Jed heard it this morning from the Smith's boy." "I expected that," she said. "He's saying you misled him. That you pretended to be older. Claimed to be something you weren't." Her spoon paused midair, then returned gently to the bowl. "I told him who I was. He just didn't like what he saw." Thomas leaned back in his chair, arms crossed. "You could answer him? Clear your name." "I've found that the truth doesn't matter much to men like Nathaniel Carr, only pride. He wasn't embarrassed because I lied, he was embarrassed because I didn't beg to stay." The wind howled then, and the fire guttered. For a moment, it sounded like someone crying outside, though they both knew it was only the storm. She rose and crossed to the hearth, stirring the flames back to life with practiced hands. "You don't have to defend me," she said without turning. "I'm not. I'm just trying to understand." She glanced back at him. Her face was calm, but her eyes had sharpened like glass in sunlight. "I've had to live with being misunderstood," she said softly. "It doesn't hurt like it used to, but it does. Stay." He studied her at this girl, who wasn't quite a girl, who carried the quiet weight of someone who had seen death and decided to keep going anyway. She never asked for affection, never sought comfort. But in that moment, he saw how much effort it took for her to simply remain. The storm deepened. Thunder rolled across the hills like a drumbeat from some old world. A shutter banged open somewhere upstairs. "I'll get it," Eliza said. "No." Thomas stood. "I will." But she was already halfway up the steps. He followed, just far enough behind to hear the wind clawing at the window in the hallway. She reached the room first, his late wife's sewing room, long unused. The shutter had come loose, and cold air howled through the crack. Eliza reached to close it, but the wind caught the frame and wrenched it wider. She stumbled back. Thomas moved without thinking, pulling it shut with a grunt, securing the latch with both hands. Then the two of them stood there, the small space. suddenly too full with breath and history. This had been Lydia's room. Her chair still sat by the window. The basket of thread had long since gathered dust, but the scent of lavender and old paper still lingered. Eliza ran her fingers along the window frame, then pulled her hand back as if it burned. "I didn't mean to," she started. Thomas shook his head. "It's all right. It's just a room now." But even as he said it, something caught in his throat. The memory of his wife sewing in this very chair, humming beneath her breath as storms rolled through, came rushing up like floodwater. He sat down slowly on the edge of the bed, elbows on his knees, hands clasped. "I don't talk about her much." "You don't have to," Eliza said. "No, but maybe I should." He didn't look at her as he spoke. She was kind, fierce when she had to be, laughed easily. She wanted to fill this place with children. We never did. A pause. "After she died, I tried to keep going, but the house got too quiet. I stopped lighting fires unless I had to. Ate standing up. Slept in the chair some nights. Just ... easier that way." Eliza moved to the doorway, leaning against the frame. "It's hard to carry love after it's gone," she said. "It gets heavy. People think it fades, but it doesn't. It just finds new places to hide." The wind outside screamed, a long high sound, like something tearing loose. Thomas looked up at her then, really looked, and in that second, he realized he had never once thought of her as a child. Her voice was low, steady. "When my brother died, I held his hand until the fever took him. Mama went 3 days later. I stayed in that house by myself for weeks before the doctor came. Buried them behind the barn, carved their names into the oak. I was 16. Thomas felt something in his chest twist. She gave a small, tired smile. "So yes, I'm young, but I've lived through more winters than most folk, twice my age." He stood slowly, took one step toward her. "Not too close. You're not what I expected. I've heard that before." A beat passed. "Stay," he said. She frowned uncertain. "I mean, here, with me. Not just as hired help. Stay, because you want to. Because maybe it doesn't have to be so lonely, for either of us." Outside, the wind began to die down, as though pausing to hear what would be said next. Eliza looked at him, long and deep, her face unreadable. Then she turned and walked down the stairs without a word. He stood in the quiet room, heart thudding louder than the wind. Back downstairs, the fire had dimmed again. She sat in front of it, legs tucked beneath her, eyes on the flames. When he joined her, she spoke first. "I'm not afraid of storms. I didn't think you were. But I am afraid of what comes after, when it's quiet again, and you have to figure out what's left standing." He nodded. "Me too." They didn't touch, didn't speak again. Just watched the fire slowly claim the last of the wood, and listened as the wind outside finally went still. The ranch, wrapped in darkness and the hush that follows reckoning, seemed to exhale. Somewhere in the quiet, something had taken root. Whether it would bloom or not, neither of them knew. But for the first time, it felt like spring might be possible. The sun rose the next morning in amber hush, painting the prairie gold. Snow clung to the far hills, but had melted in long streaks across the pasture, as though winter had finally begun to loosen its grip. Smoke drifted from the chimney. The ranch stirred to life. Eliza moved through the kitchen quietly, sleeves rolled, hair braided back, her hands dusted in flour. A loaf was rising by the stove, coffee boiled gently on the fire. There was peace in the room, peace hard-won, the kind that crept in only after sorrow had been honored and silence shared. She heard the hoofbeats before she saw them, a single rider, not rushing, but with purpose. Thomas stepped out onto the porch before the knock could come. The rider was Sheriff Haldina, man of few words and narrower loyalties. Not unkind, but easily persuaded by louder voices and deeper pockets. He dismounted with a slow sigh, tipped his hat. "Mornin', Avery." Thomas nodded. Sheriff Held shifted his weight. "Got a letter last night. From Nathaniel Carr." Thomas's jaw stiffened, but he didn't speak. "He's filed a formal grievance. Says you're harboring a girl under false pretenses. Claims she misrepresented herself and was promised to him by contract." Inside, Eliza had stopped kneading the dough. She stood frozen, listening, heart thudding with quiet fury. Thomas folded his arms. "She's no runaway. She was rejected, left with nothing. I gave her honest work." Halden looked uncomfortable. "I know. I told Carr the same, but he's a loud man with friends in places that carry weight." "Is that supposed to scare me?" Thomas asked. "No," the sheriff said, "but it might hurt her." He looked toward the door, where Eliza now stood, pale but steady. "You might be asked to bring her in for questioning," Halden continued, "just to clear the air. Let the judge hear her side." "She hasn't done a damn thing wrong," Thomas said. Halden nodded. "I know, but the law listens slow when money talks fast." When the sheriff rode off, dust trailing behind him like smoke, Thomas turned to Eliza. She stood with her hands at her sides, eyes unblinking. "You don't have to stay," he said. "Not if it puts you at risk." She stepped closer. "And go where?" "Back east, where I have no name left. To another town that won't trust a girl without a man to speak for her." He didn't answer. "I'm not running again," she said, voice like flint. The day passed under a low sky. Clouds moved in, not with the threat of storm, but with the weight of waiting. By late afternoon, Martha arrived in a wagon, apron flapping. In the wind, she'd brought fabric and preserves, and a glare that could flatten pride. "Heard what Carr's trying to do," she said, setting jars down with a thud. "Let him try. That man couldn't tell the truth if it wore perfume and kissed him." Later, Jed came up from the pasture, hat in hand. "They're talking in town. Some say you'll be dragged into court. Others say Carr just wants to scare you." Eliza sat on the porch step, arms wrapped around her knees. "Let them talk," she said. "Words don't break bones." Thomas stood beside her. His hand brushed against hers, not holding, not grasping, but there at sundown. As the light dimmed and the birds hushed, Carr arrived. He came in a carriage defined for the road, his coat spotless, his shoes shined. He stepped down as if the dirt offended him. Behind him, two men climbed out, strangers with blank eyes, the kind that traveled with men who liked control. Thomas didn't move. Eliza rose and came to stand beside him. Carr tipped his hat with mock courtesy. "Well," he said, voice slick as oil, "don't you two make a picture?" Thomas said nothing. Carr turned to Eliza. "You've stirred quite the nest, haven't you?" he said. "Pretending to be a woman when you're barely more than a child, and now hiding behind another man's kindness." Eliza looked at him, quiet and still. "I never lied," she said. "You just didn't like the truth." Carr's jaw tightened. "You were promised. That letter was a binding offer. I was offered like a pair of boots," she said softly. "You didn't want a partner. You wanted a servant." One of Carr's men stepped forward, but Thomas's voice cut through like a blade. "She's under my roof. My word protects her now." Carr laughed. "You think you're above the law?" "No," Thomas said. "I just know what the law looks like when it wears a smug face and rides in on borrowed justice." Carr sneered. "This isn't over." He turned, but Eliza spoke one last time. "You're right," she said, voice steady. "It's not over. But I'm not the one losing sleep anymore." He left in silence, dust swirling behind him. The ranch watched him go, like it had seen this kind of man before, and had learned how to outlive him. That night, the stars returned, brighter than before, scattered like seeds. Eliza sat at the kitchen table, a warm cup between her hands. Thomas paced once, then stopped. "You could stay," he said. She looked up. "I already did." He took a breath. I mean stay as more than help. Not because you owe me. Not because I rescued you. But because, one, this house feels different when you're in it. She watched him for a long moment, then smiled, small and certain. I'd stay, she said, if you asked me as a friend, not an owner. He stepped closer, not rushed, not desperate, just sure. Then stay. As my equal, as my choice. The fire crackled behind them. A wind passed outside, soft and warm. No longer a threat, just the breath of a new season. Martha and Jed stood with them days later, under the cottonwood tree near the barn. The ceremony was simple. No lace, no music, just truth spoken and hands joined. It wasn't about starting over. It was about choosing not to run. After the vows, Thomas handed her a small cloth pouch inside seeds, tomatoes, squash, herbs, for that garden you wanted, he said. She blinked back tears, but didn't let them fall. I'll plant it tomorrow, she said. Roots belong somewhere. He touched her cheek gently. So do you. The sun dipped low behind them, lighting the sky in gold and fire. They stood side by side, not as rescuer and rescued, not as protector and protected, but as two people who had lost and lived, and found in each other a kind of beginning, not perfect, not easy, but true. And in a world like theirs, that was more than enough. Somewhere beyond the hills, a hawk soared, and the ranch, quiet and breathing, stood not as a place of sorrow but as a home that had remembered how to hope.